1 million people, no refrigeration, no trucks, no trains. And yet, for nearly 500 years, the city of Rome never truly starved. Think about what that means. Your family needs food today and tomorrow and every day after that, whether the harvest was good or bad, whether the sea was calm or violent. Now multiply your family by 1 million. Rome did that every single day for centuries, without a single can of preserved food, without a single refrigerated container, without a single truck idling outside a warehouse. How? Here's the machine nobody built on purpose that kept 1 million people from starving. A bureaucracy so quiet you've probably never heard its name, running ships, warehouses, and ledgers across an entire sea. This isn't really a story about Rome. It's a story about food logistics at civilizational scale, a problem every large city since has had to solve, and most got wrong. New York, London, Tokyo, they all eat because someone, somewhere, moves grain across water on a schedule. Rome just did it first, and did it without engines. Let's go inside the machine. By the 2nd century, Rome's population had swelled past 1 million people. The land around the city, your land, if you lived there, your family's fields, could feed maybe 1/10 of that. The math simply didn't work. So Rome looked south, across the sea, to Egypt. Egypt was the richest farmland in the known world, not by luck, but by geography. Every year, the Nile flooded and left behind a layer of black silt, so fertile that farmers barely needed to work for it. Historians estimate Egypt alone could feed Rome for roughly 4 months out of every year, just from that one river's floodplain. North Africa and Sicily made up the rest. But knowing where the food is isn't the same as getting it to you. And this is where the real story begins. Not with soldiers, not with emperors, but with ships. Grain ships of the Roman world were enormous for their time, some capable of carrying 250 tons of wheat in a single hold. Imagine a building's worth of grain floating. These ships left Alexandria in convoys, timed to a sailing season that opened in spring and slammed shut by autumn, when Mediterranean storms turned the crossing into a gamble with your life. A voyage from Egypt to Italy in good weather took about 50 days. 50 days. Think about trusting your next meal to a wooden ship, at the mercy of wind for 50 days. Now picture the moment those ships actually mattered, not in theory, but in a single year when the fleet was late. A storm delayed the convoy. Weeks passed. Grain reserves in the city's warehouses thinned. Prices climbed. And in a city of 1 million people living close together, hunger doesn't stay quiet for long. It turns into anger in the street, and anger in the street becomes a problem for whoever sits on the throne. This is the moment the ship stopped being cargo and became politics. Because here's the deeper current running under all of this. The emperor's power was tied, invisibly, to whether ships from Egypt arrived on time. So who made sure they did? Not soldiers, not senators, a prefect, a title you've likely never heard, the Praefectus Annonae. Established formally under the Emperor Claudius, this office existed for one purpose: keep the grain moving. Under this prefect worked an entire invisible workforce: portmasters who inspected every incoming ship, warehouse managers who ran the Horea, vast storage complexes at the port of Ostia, and later the newer harbor of Portus, built specifically because Ostia's shallow waters kept losing ships to the sandbars. Registrars who kept lists of citizens eligible for the grain dole. Bargemen who moved sacks up the Tiber because the big seagoing ships couldn't reach Rome itself. These are the people nobody names when they tell you Rome was great. Not the emperor giving speeches, not the general on his horse, the clerk checking a ship's manifest against a ledger. At dawn, in a port city most tourists walk past today without a second thought. The registrar making sure your name, an ordinary citizen's name, was on the list to receive your monthly ration, something like 30 kilograms of wheat, collected with a token called a tessera. This system fed you whether you were rich or poor, whether the harvest near Rome had failed or not, because it drew from an entire sea instead of one field. And it worked. For centuries it worked. But a system that feeds 1 million people through a single supply line is also a system with a single point of failure. Because everything, the ships, the warehouses, the prefect's office, the emperor's grip on power, all of it depended on one fragile constant: convoys crossing open water, on schedule, unbothered by storm or war or piracy. What happens when that stops? It did stop eventually, not all at once. As the empire fractured, as Egypt and North Africa slipped from Roman control in the 5th century, the grain stopped arriving in the volumes it once had. Historians point to this moment as one of the quiet turning points in Rome's decline. Not a single dramatic battle, but the slow unraveling of a supply chain that the city had trusted without thinking about it for 400 years. A city that had swollen to 1 million people on the strength of imported grain began shrinking over generations back down toward what its own land could actually support. So here is the full shape of it. The same system that let Rome become the largest city the ancient world had ever seen, a system of ships, ports, prefects, and ledgers spanning an entire sea, was also the reason Rome could never truly be self-sufficient. Its greatness and its fragility were the same machine, viewed from two different angles. That's not a coincidence. That's what happens whenever a civilization scales past what its own backyard can feed. The scale requires the network, and the network becomes the thing that can break you. Every city you've ever lived in has its own version of this system running right now, quietly, that you've never had to think about. Trucks on highways you don't see, ships you'll never board, carrying food from countries you may never visit, warehouses with names you don't know, run by people whose job titles wouldn't fit on a business card, keeping your shelves full on a schedule so reliable you've stopped noticing it's happening at all. Rome ran on wooden ships and human ledgers, and it still fed 1 million people for 500 years. What does your city run on? And what happens the day it stops?